Two candidates vie for the 19th congressional seat. Democrat Cindy Banyai will face off against Republican Byron Donalds in a debate about the topics important to Southwest Florida. Who will be your choice in the election of 2020? Join us now, live from the WGCU studio. Hello and welcome to the WGCU News Press and Naples Daily News debate between the two candidates vying for Florida's 19th congressional seat in the U.S. House of Representatives. I'm Julie Glenn, WGCU News Director and timekeeper for the night. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer questions, and their opponent will then have 1 minute. Then each candidate can take 30 seconds for rebuttal if they wish to do so. The candidates are Democratic nominee Dr. Cindy Banyai and Republican Byron Donalds. Thank you both for joining us live in the studio tonight. I'll try to give each of you a 10-second warning as time starts running down. I'll be doing that with the high-tech hands. So watch the peripheral vision and I'll count you guys down. Also, before we came on the air, we did a coin toss to decide which candidate would respond first to the first question. The winner of that was Cindy Banyai, who opted to go first. Asking the questions tonight, we have News Press senior reporter Amy Bennett Williams and WGCU Morning Edition host, reporter, and assistant news director John Davis. Many of the questions will incorporate inquiries that were sent in via social media by our listeners and readers. For the first question, let's turn to Amy Bennett Williams.
Good evening. This is one of those that came to us from a member of our audience online, and it is about COVID-19. Do you believe that masks help prevent the spread of COVID-19? Why or why not? And should we listen to health officials about wearing masks and social distancing?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for that question. It's a great question to start off with. We had an amazing milestone come up here globally. 1 million people have died around the world from COVID-19. We have 200,000 Americans dead because Trump chose to lie to the American people about the risk. We have somebody here tonight who is right in line with that. And when it comes to masks, they work. It's the simplest thing that we can do. It's patriotic to care about your fellow Americans. And in fact, I brought with me today the mask that I received when I met the leaders from the Naples Community Hospital. They are here serving our community. They know that public health matters. And I think that we need people who are ready to serve and take this serious and are interested in public health, and masks are a part of that.
Mr. Donalds?
First of all, thanks so much for having me here today, and thank you for the question. I believe that people should wear masks if they choose to. The issue we've only had in Southwest Florida, and frankly in most of the country, is whether government has the authority to make you wear a mask. Let's be very clear on this. In the state of Florida, my position has been clear. I do not believe local governments have the authority to tell every citizen that they must wear a mask on their face. Now, if you are a citizen who has extenuating health circumstances, or you have family members who have extenuating health circumstances, my advice to you is to wear a mask. But the choice is yours. The choice is not government's. One of the issues we are finding right now in COVID-19, one of the initial things that came out from the CDC was making sure you washed your hands for 20 seconds, social distancing, and not touching your face. Those are by far the most effective things to help stop the spread of COVID-19. Masks came in as another issue with respect to stopping the spread. But I think we have to get back to the core thing, which is people need to decide these things for yourself. Government doesn't have the authority to make you do it.
Time. Dr. Banyai, 30 seconds.
So masks work, and they protect others from you. So it doesn't matter how healthy your own family is. You can still pass that on to somebody else. But absolutely, government can make those rules. If you drive drunk, you go to jail. If you wear a seatbelt, if you don't wear a seatbelt, you get a ticket. If you sell drugs, you go to jail. You know, we have to ask ourselves how this works. And you can be forgiven for doing something, but you cannot be forgotten.
Well, you just ran out of time.
I know.
Right. Mr. Diaz? Sorry.
Quick response on this one. Again, I want to be clear. Well, my opponent was referencing, it was the criminal code. And yes, we have many things in our criminal code, but we are currently in an emergency situation, one where, frankly, we're actually getting better every single day here in the United States, and especially in Florida. But again, the key question around masks is not whether somebody should wear them if they feel it is necessary to protect their health and the health of their family members and friends. It's whether local governments have the authority to make you do it. It is clear in the state of Florida, they do not.
And time, right on time. Next question comes from John Davis.
Our next question also relates to the COVID-19 pandemic. This also came from one of our audience members submitted online. Do you believe we need a national strategy for stopping the spread of the coronavirus, and why or why not? And Mr. Donalds, we'll start with you.
No, thank you. And this is another important question. We absolutely need a national strategy. The thing is, though, we already have one. The President of the United States has been leading a national strategy from as far back as January. You see, back in the State of the Union, the President himself did talk about COVID-19 and making sure that we started paying attention to this. So even though some people in the media want to say that he has ignored it, that is not the case, especially when you go back and look at the data. The President shut down travel, non-essential travel from China and from Europe. He did that long before the outbreak started happening here in the United States. We have actually made sure that we have had every piece of material necessary for our hospital system to, number one, not be overwhelmed, but also, number two, to protect our first responders. So they had the equipment necessary to actually take care of people who came down with the worst effects of COVID-19. I think the last thing you want to look at is what has been the information that has come from government, like washing of hands, like keeping distance from people. These all are things that has happened. So we actually have had a national strategy. We need to continue to get better.
Time. Dr. Banyai?
I wish we had a national strategy. This is the biggest failure in history, and it lands right at Trump's feet. We should have had a strategy. We should have had coordination among the states. We should have had a stronger and faster response. I don't know how we got to the point where over 200,000 Americans dead is acceptable. It's not. We should have had a leader that inspired unity, getting people to do things like wearing a mask, instead of ridiculing people and telling people that it's not necessary. He downplayed it from the very beginning. And this is not something that we just heard from in the media. This is out of his own mouth, calling it fake news, calling it the China virus, calling it a hoax. It is not a hoax. People died because there was no national strategy. And I will not let that be forgotten.
Unfortunately, what you're not hearing is a plan on a strategic response. Let me be clear on this one. We have had a strategic response to COVID-19. We have had coordinations between states. This is why red states and blue states have been able to get the help that they needed in order to combat the COVID-19 crisis and also make sure people who have the worst symptoms get the help that they need. But what we're hearing, frankly, from Democrats and the left are talking points. All we're hearing is that there was no plan, but that is not true. I always want to know what was their strategy, what was their plan, because all I see that it is just trying to ridicule the president from trying to do his job to protect American lives here at home.
Dr. Banyai, 30 seconds.
Well, I've actually lived through a pandemic before in 2003 with SARS in Taiwan. And what we should have done is what they did. Inform the public of the risk, take precautions early and consistently, and get everybody together to make sure that they are doing what is necessary, wearing those masks, socially distancing. That is part of what we missed. We didn't do anything until mid-March, until it was nearly too late, and 200,000 Americans died, and more will, because we still don't have that strategy.
End time. Next question is coming from Amy Bennett Williams.
As you both know, Congressman Francis Rooney has been a very strong advocate for the environment and, more significantly, battling climate change while serving in the House. Many in Southwest Florida would like to see his legacy live on through the work of his replacement. So can you please outline the steps Southwest Florida should be taking to ensure resiliency in the face of climate change, i.e., how should we be preparing for strengthening storms, rising sea levels, and what should the federal government's role be in this?
Great, thank you. So yes, it's true that Representative Rooney was somebody who had broke ranks, essentially, to recognize the importance of climate change and the human component of it. I will tell you right now, and I'll let him speak on this, my opponent has denied the human factor in climate change, which is demonstrable according to evidence and thousands of scientists around the world. Florida is going to be the most highly affected state in the entire country when it comes to climate change. We need action. We need coordinated action from the local level to the state, to the federal, to the international level to begin the climate mitigation around reducing the carbon footprint of countries as well as the other greenhouse gases, shifting to renewable technologies, and working on those climate mitigation strategies on the local level. We're going to need funding from the federal government to be able to do that, and we're also going to need initiatives such as the Florida Green New Deal to help our economy as well as localities, as well as the Green New Deal across the United States to make sure that we're investing in the technologies for the future.
That's time.
First of all, let me just say this. The science on man-made climate change or man-made global warming or man-made global cooling, whatever we choose to call it, is not settled. What we do know is that seas are rising. Sea level rise is real. It is impacting parts of Florida and, frankly, parts of the world, without question. Is there something that we should be doing with a coordinated federal response on sea level rise? Perhaps. But here's what we're already doing in the United States. Here in our country, we've already limited more CO2 emission than in any other country in the world that is our size. The Chinese are not doing it. India is not doing it. We have already been leading that fight and doing that here at home. We have actually been making sure that we do the things to protect our waters and to protect our environment here at home. And we're going to continue to do those things. But signing on to radical policies like the Green New Deal, all it will cause is for electricity prices to rise and the poorest among us will suffer. That is not the type of strategy that we need going forward, not just with energy policy, but environmental policy.
And time.
The poorest among us suffer from climate injustice. They suffer from environmental racism. These are problems that happen in our community every single day. So saying that by taking a challenge and a leap into the future with green technologies that is going to affect the poorest and the most vulnerable among us is ridiculous. We have no choice but to do this if we want a future for our children and our grandchildren. Let's take the risk. It is not a risk. It is not something that we cannot not do.
And time.
I don't want to speak for the people watching at home, but for myself, I don't like hyperbole. I don't like being told that I'm not taking something seriously. What I like to deal with is concrete plans. Here's what the Green New Deal will do for you, the citizens. It will raise your electricity prices. It will make it harder for hardworking families who already are trying to make ends meet to just keep the lights on. And it will actually hurt our economy. If you don't have a consistent supply of cheap energy, your economy suffers. My opponent will not address those facts.
30 seconds. Dr. Bennett?
Facts do matter. In fact, there is consensus on global warming. There are thousands and thousands of scientists that tell us it's happening. This is not hyperbole. This is Category 5 hurricanes spinning, heading right for us. This is fires in the West Coast, burning uncontrollably every single year. We need action. And it is not just about the energy prices rising, because you know what we can do to combat that? We can break up the monopolies that the energy companies have, preventing us from being able to invest in those technologies.
Mr. Donalds, 30 seconds.
Yeah, quick 30 seconds on that one. What's happening in California is frankly the result of the state of California not cleaning out the underbrush in their forests. It's something we do here in Florida. Again, this is what I'm talking about when I mean actual plans and not hyperbole. The last part is, if we want to have green technology, then we actually need to look at things that don't emit into the air, like nuclear power. You see, that's a plan. France has already been committed to nuclear power. We can do that here in the United States to make our energy consistent while also making sure people get all of the energy that they need for their economy and their lives.
And time. And next question is coming from John Davis.
Our next question also pertains to the environment. This one also came from a member of our community here. Please share with us your views on the rights of nature movement and home rule as it relates to a municipality's ability to make rules about things that impact the environment. For example, should Monroe County, home of the Keys coral reefs, be able to forbid the use of certain sunscreens that may be harmful to coral organisms? Likewise, should the city of Sanibel be able to ban styrofoam to-go packaging? And what about Fort Myers Beach Town Council's ban on plastic straws? What do you think about places making their own rules for their own unique circumstances? And Mr. Donalds, we'll start with you.
I've had the pleasure of serving in Florida's legislature for the past 4 years. I will tell you that when it comes to these types of bans and these types of rules in municipalities and local communities, it makes it incredibly difficult on the entire economic framework at the state level. One of the things with this is very, very clear. Local governments have a lot of authorities. They do. But one of the limits on that authority is whether they have the responsibility and the ability to make wholesale economic changes that impact the businesses in those communities. So at the state legislature, we have stood against some of these things. We've stood against the sunscreen ban because the science is actually not clear on whether sunscreen actually erodes coral. It is not clear. And so instead of having localities make these decisions at the state legislative level, what we have done in previous sessions, some of the sessions I've been involved in, is making sure that we preempt those actions because we want to make sure we have a consistent environmental and economic framework in the state of Florida.
Dr. Banyai.
I absolutely support the rights of nature. I think that we all deserve the right to have clean air and clean lands and clean water. This is not a hard decision for me. Do I believe that we should just sell those rights out to the highest bidder, like some people have? I don't think so. Let's talk about home rule, though. So as somebody like me who is a public administration expert, this is something I find incredibly fascinating, that we can look at the state legislature and have them put in preemptions into environmental bills that specifically override localities. What about letting the people decide? What about decentralized governance? What about all of that? And frankly, if we're going to let the localities decide how we handle the pandemic, such with mask mandates and things like that, why wouldn't we let them handle the environmental components, like the straw bans and the sunscreen? I just don't understand that. That seems duplicitous to me.
And time.
I think if you've looked at my record in the legislature and even the things that I advocate for, I'm actually quite consistent on this. Just like I don't think local governments have the authority to mandate masks, I don't think local governments have the authority to create environmental policy on the local level. This is something that actually belongs at the state level. And this is very important. There is home rule for things like zoning measures and where you're going to put homes, how you're going to build local roads, things like that. But when it comes to environmental policy, this does belong at the state level. That's where it belongs and that's where it should reside. I don't believe in just giving local governments unilateral power because unilateral power in our state actually exists at the state level.
Dr. Banyai.
Well, much like with COVID, when the state didn't act in the will of the people and with their best interests in mind, they forced the local governments to take action. The same thing is happening at the state level with environmental issues. It's happening every single day, and it's happening under your watch. And I think that it is important that when we are abdicated in terms of our leadership at the state level, that the localities step in and take that responsibility. So I absolutely support home rule, particularly around environmental causes, as well as local governance.
Sorry, you're at time. Next question, Amy Bennett Williams.
This one is pretty straightforward. What concrete steps will you take to ensure that the quality of our water does not further deteriorate?
That's an absolutely important question. We know that water is the lifeblood of our economy here. It's why so many of us live here and love Southwest Florida. What we need to do is hold polluters accountable. There's been very little political will around this recently in the state of Florida, and that absolutely needs to be happening. We need to fortify the EPA to make sure that they have the ability to help the state of Florida with their oversight. We also need additional funding, like funding the water school here at WGCU for research into red tide and blue-green algae so that we know about it better, so that we can make better informed policy. Policy based on actual science, not just what we wish it was.
I think this is really important. I thank you for the question. A couple of things. When it comes to actual water quality in Southwest Florida, when we take into account not just the Caloosahatchee River, but also the Lake Okeechobee and really the St. Lucie River on the other side of the state, what it requires is the federal government actually stepping up to the plate and actually funding water projects here with respect to Everglades restoration. This is one of the areas that we do have to commend President Trump. He's the first president that has actually stepped forward to fund the projects to clean up the Everglades system here at home. Governor DeSantis, under his leadership in Florida, we've actually funded $1.5 billion towards the same water projects. And with respect to holding polluters accountable, one of my former colleagues, Senator Joe Gruters, actually authored a bill that we passed this last session, which actually called for holding local governments accountable when they dump raw sewage into our waterways. That's something we've done at the state level. Furthermore, the water school at FGCU, we funded that. I voted for it right here for Southwest Florida.
Like to respond?
Yeah, absolutely. One way that we can help local governments with their infrastructure is by making investments in them and making that happen. That's going to be extremely important to stop things like the largest sewage leaks that we've ever seen in Fort Myers. And yeah, I think that it's, again, really interesting how you want to have localities have responsibility sometimes, but not others. I really think you need to take a stand on where it is that localities have responsibilities or not. And there's another thing. So yes, we need to fund Everglades restoration, but it wasn't Trump. Trump does not have the power of the purse. Congress does. So quit giving away his credit to him.
The last thing I want to make sure everybody understands is, once again, we're having this mix-up between talking points and what is actually happening. So let me be clear with the people watching at home and everybody who cares about this election going forward. In the Florida legislature, we have taken actionable steps to clean our water. In the last 4 years that I've served in your legislature, I have been a part of that work. And they're not done in Tallahassee, and we're going to be far from done when it comes to what Washington needs to do. And that's to step up to the plate and fund the necessary projects. And I'm committed to doing that.
And time. Next question is going to John Davis.
Yeah, our next question is also related to the environment. There's currently a ban on oil and gas drilling off Florida's shores. Do you think that ban should be made permanent? And if so, what would you do in the House towards that effort? Mr. Donalds, we'll start with you.
Oh, I definitely do support the fact that we need to continue that ban. A couple of things. Our water is critical, like we just had that conversation previously. It is critical to the state of Florida. One of the things that has just occurred is actually extending that ban going forward for several years. I don't have the number of years committed to memory right now, but I do think we need to be committed to that here in Florida. Our environment is very different than in other parts of the United States. So that's something that I know that I will continue to support in Washington, is to making sure that we're not drilling for oil off the Gulf of Mexico, or frankly, off the Atlantic Ocean for that matter.
Dr. Banyai?
Yes, I absolutely believe that we should continue the ban on drilling in the Gulf waters as well as the Atlantic waters. This just makes sense. In Florida, it's our economy, it's our environment, it's our health. It's really important. What I want to reiterate here for you and for our audience is that my opponent can talk about his record of greenwashing at the state level, but I have been endorsed by Vote Water based on my commitments to the environment. He has a much lower rating than me by that nonpartisan organization because of the way that he has addressed water at the state level. It is not enough. It is not enough. And I am tired of people coming up telling us all the good things they did while they do things in the state legislature, like put in preemptions that make things in our environment worse. So yeah, let's continue to preserve our water, and absolutely extending that ban on drilling is part of that.
Mr. Donalds? Okay. All right. Let's go to the next question then.
And this is the last one for the night about the environment, and also came from a member of our audience. They want to know if you would please clarify what you intend to do to address the rapid pace of land development, i.e. conservation versus concrete. And that goes to Dr. Banyai.
Yeah, this is a priority because we're going to run out of land at some point here. We have a lot of people moving into the state of Florida because it's an amazing place to be. This is something that is a very local issue, right? Land use policy is local. And we need to help support those local decisions by helping to set priorities around what is conservation land and what we can use for commercial and residential development. So I think we can help by providing funding from the national level for those conservation lands to buy key properties that will help keep our waters and estuaries safe and healthy, and prioritizing that. We can't just sell out the shore to everybody and to the highest bidder, like we have so many times in Florida. I think it's extremely important that we maintain our environment for everyone that's here, not just a select few.
Go ahead.
I actually agree with that statement. This is something that is local government's responsibility. It is their responsibility to make sure that they actually handle the land that is within the boundaries of their municipality, whether that's a city or a county. There are already many programs that exist in Lee and Collier County that go to this effect. The one thing I want to be clear on is that this is a local matter. This is where citizens and their county commissioners or their city councils actually are a part of that process about what lands are going to come available for development. The one thing we have to be very careful about, though, are property rights, because there are people who own these properties. They're not just owned by the federal government or state government. And so we have to be very careful to respect their property rights as well. But I think this is a local government issue. I think this needs to be handled at home.
Dr. Banyai, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, local government is really important. I do want to point out that we need to respect property owners, but that there are certain things that are not for sale, like our beaches. We have to make sure that there is public access to beaches and they're not just sold off and cordoned off and not available for public use. And I think that what I would like to do as your next Congresswoman is to make sure that we have participatory practices at our local level that really involve people from the very beginning in the design of the things that are most important to them, such as land use policy and development.
And that's time. Would you like 30 more seconds on this?
The only thing I'll add to that is that we already have participatory government. That's what open meetings law does. That's why people actually post meeting agendas. The public has a right to comment. I think it is important that local officials, all elected officials, whether it's myself or my opponent or anybody else that serves our community, they make sure that they're always listening to everything that their constituency wants. But when it comes time to making those decisions, with respect to land use, that belongs at home. But we also have to make sure that we protect people's property rights as well.
And it was right at time, and it's time for our next question. John Davis?
This one gets into taxes. Both of you have highlighted your policy issues, a need to simplify the tax code. And although your broader vision of what that might look like is likely very different, I'm hoping each of you can explore your positions when it comes to federal government tax policy and where you think reforms need to be made. And Mr. Button, we'll start with you.
All right, thank you. Trying to remember which one of us is going first sometimes.
So are we.
That's okay. Listen, when it comes to federal taxes, I think the simpler, the better. I'm a supporter of the fair tax. I have been for a long time. You see, Florida is actually a consumption-based tax state. We don't have an income tax in Florida. We have a consumption tax. 7%, and some municipalities have added on that depending on where you are. So that's how we tax in the state of Florida. I believe that what we should be doing at the federal level is something similar. Another policy that I support is actually the flat tax, and the flat tax comes in a couple variations. One is you have one consistent income tax rate across the board, no deductions, no exemptions. Everybody ponies up and they pay what they have to pay. A hybrid of that is you go to two rates, 10% and 25%. But again, all that can be massaged. The one thing that's important for voters to understand is tax policy has one goal, and its goal is to make sure that the federal government or any government has the resources it needs to take care of its duties and responsibilities. Taxation should be simple. It should not be convoluted.
And we're at time. Dr. Banyai?
Yeah, so this is actually a place where Byron and I agree. I think that we should simplify the tax code. I also think that we should close out loopholes that allow people to take advantage of our tax system, much like we're seeing right now with our president, Donald Trump, having only paid $750 for 2 years on his taxes. That is just unbelievable and unacceptable in a fair and just country. But I also want to say, when we think about taxes, we need to realign our thinking on how this works. Taxes is not an input-output thing with our economy. Taxes do not pay for government programs. Taxes are a way to get buy-in and stakeholdership by the American people into our system. It is not just a way that we fund things. The government has the ability to fund things, and they have, and we see that every single time that they fiat and print money to get things done.
And we're at time. Would you like 30 seconds?
Quick response. Listen, I don't know about you at home, but I don't need to pay taxes to have buy-in to our system. I'm an American citizen. I think what we have to be able to do is understand that we have a responsibility as citizens. We live in the greatest country in the world. But tax policy is to take your hard-earned money to fund the things that happen, whether it's the federal level, the state level, or even the local level. What we want to make sure we do is that we're spending that money efficiently as possible. But nobody should pay any more in taxes than they're legally obligated to.
All right.
I agree. I am actually somebody who is an expert in efficiency and effectiveness as an evaluator. It's something I am really looking forward to taking to our U.S. Congress, to bring evaluation, to actually bring efficiency to our programs. Because it's not fiscal austerity that saves us. It's efficiency and implementation. And that's where we go wrong. We can afford the things that we need in this country, but we cannot afford waste and corruption like we've seen under the likes of Donald Trump and his administration.
And we're at time. Next question is coming from Amy Bennett Williams.
It is for Dr. Banyai. With the national debt now topping $26 trillion, Mr. Donalds has said that he supports creating a balanced budget amendment to force Congress to pass a balanced budget, just like state lawmakers here in Florida and many other states have to do. Conversely, opponents of the idea of a balanced budget amendment argue that it could limit the ability of future policymakers to use fiscal policy to counteract recessions or respond to national emergencies like the one we're experiencing now. So can each of you please discuss your positions regarding the balanced budget amendment idea and your approach to addressing government spending more broadly?
Yes, absolutely. So we do not need a balanced budget amendment. Like I said, our government, our national government does not work the same way that a household budget works. It's not in, out. We are much larger and more sophisticated than that. We have financial tools that allow us to have credit at the national level to get what we need done. We print money when we need it. That is how our government works. We can afford what we need. We do not have to have these poison pill discussions on the debt and the deficit, because all that is a way to talk about programs that you don't like and kill them under the guise of fiscal responsibility. And I am tired of it, because we know that money goes to the top all the time. But we need to have policies and programs that will help the everyday American people. And we do that through investing in them in the appropriate ways and not having killing things like the budget amendment.
To you, Mr. Donalds.
I fundamentally disagree. We need a balanced budget amendment. We needed it 50 years ago. Why? Because we have career politicians in Washington, D.C. who don't know how to control spending. In the state of Florida, we have a balanced budget amendment in our Constitution. And the reason why it is critical is because the state of Florida doesn't spend more than it needs. In our state's budget, we also created a $3 billion rainy day fund for times when things got hard, like during COVID-19. So the reason we didn't go through massive budget cuts is because we had the reserves in order to make sure we kept services up in a tough economic time. That's why you have a balanced budget amendment. The last thing I will say is we have many federal programs that need necessary reform. It is critical because we're not just borrowing money out of thin air. We are borrowing the taxes on the future earnings of our kids in colleges, our kids in high school, our kids in elementary school, and children who have not been born yet. And they have no say in what we're doing right now as adults. It is needed, it is time, and I'm going to fight for it.
That's simply not true. The way that our economy functions is we create money when we need it. It is a public good that helps us give relational value to our economy. So we don't have to worry about the future of the future. And by the way, if we needed this 50 years ago, why didn't we have it? And why hasn't the world fallen down around us, if that's the case? Because we've been hearing this for a very long time, and it simply hasn't come true. You know, there is not just one day or one magic number where the economy falls out because we haven't had a balanced budget. That's not how it works. We have a strong economy, and we can keep investing in the American people.
And time. Would you like another 30?
I would.
All right.
The thought that you can just print money out of nowhere comes from no knowledge of economics. This is my career. You cannot just continue to print money into the future with no regard from who you're taking it from. And let me be clear, the national debt, how it's going to be repaid, is on the backs of future citizens. I'm 41 years old. I'm in the game, and I'm going to have a responsibility to take care of this myself. But it's also my kids. It is their grandkids who are going to bear the burden of our reckless fiscal policies. We have to get it under control.
And we're at time, and that takes us to the next question, and that is going to John Davis.
Our next question pertains to education. When it comes to K through 12 education specifically, how would you describe your position regarding the role of public schools and private and charter schools, particularly when it comes to public funding? Mr. Donalds.
My position is actually quite clear. Public education has been a tremendous thing for our country, but it's time for it to change. Public education was actually created to take children off of farmland and bring them into the industrialized workforce. But now we're in the information age, and we're even moving past that. We're going to move into the gig economy. We're already there right now, and the future is right in front of us. I believe that public money should follow the child. Parents should have the ability and the authority, frankly, to make decisions on the academic environment that their children need to best suit their academic interests. I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York. I grew up in a single-parent household. My mother took her own hard-earned money and put me in a private school because PS 235 in Brooklyn, New York wasn't providing the education that she felt I deserved, and she made that personal sacrifice. That sacrifice is what made me the man I am today. I believe every parent should have the ability to direct educational spending for their children. It should not be directed by bureaucrats and elected officials.
And time. Dr. Banyai?
I absolutely believe that American parents should be able to do just what your mom did. Pay for private school when they think that the option for public school is not serving them. What my opponent here is talking about when we're talking about public dollars for education, following the child, is he means he wants them to follow that child to a charter school that can make money off of them. This is a gross injustice to the child when those schools fail because they don't have oversight, or they get a substandard education because there is very little accountability oftentimes in these schools. We saw one close down here in Fort Myers not too long ago for this very reason. Public education is a public good. Public dollars need to stay in the public realm, not be funneled off and shunted off so that some people can profit while our kids suffer.
Time. 30.
I'm glad my opponent brought up public money staying in the public sector. Because the food stamp program, the SNAP program, however you want to call it, used to be a food direct program from the federal government. The federal government used to be in the food business. It got out of that business. You see, I was on food stamps as a kid, and what they gave you was a booklet that you could take to any grocery store to get better food to suit your nutritional needs. If it was good enough for food, it should be good enough for education.
Dr. Banyai?
That's a totally different issue because we're actually talking about education. And we're actually talking about something that people that you are very close to profit from because of decisions you've made at the state level. I want everybody to look into this deeply, what it means when we are moving public dollars into private pockets in charter schools. Because this is not just, oh, let's do it for the kids. There are people whose bank accounts are getting filled with that public dollars, and I think it needs to be acknowledged.
And time. Next question is going to Amy Bennett Williams.
And it's about the cost of higher education. A report from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development finds that today, the U.S. spends more on college than almost any other country, including the contributions from individual families and the government, things like student loans, grants, and other assistance. Americans spend nearly twice as much as the average developed country. What would you do to help make a college education more affordable and more accessible?
So I am a proponent of looking at how we can make public colleges free for students who are interested in going to them. That's state colleges and public universities. Because this is just simply an expansion of the K-12 education system that we know you need to get into this high-tech economy. I will tell you that our student loan system is nothing short of a disgrace, what it does to people in my generation who had to leverage loans to be able to go to school. Those costs at universities have gone sky high. And what it did, conversely, because we decided to put the responsibility on the individual, is crippled our economy overall because millennials can't buy homes. They're too indebted from this education. And by the way, they can't make a good living because wages have stagnated along the way. This was a poorly designed plan, and we really need to rethink how we do higher education to continue to maintain our place as a global leader in the high-tech economy.
And time. Mr. Donalds?
I went to school on student loans. I pay them every month. I wish I didn't have to, but they were a key for me to get a higher education so I could actually enter into the workforce and make something of myself. It doesn't work out that way for every college student. One of the things that I fought for in the state legislature and I continue to advocate for and I will continue to fight for is that our young people have multiple pathways to success. Everybody's not prepared to go to college. Everybody shouldn't be forced to go to college. You see, myself and Dr. Banyai, we were in the generation where they told us, you better go to college to be a success. That's not true. There's multiple pathways to do that. And if you actually allow these pathways to exist through a dynamic public education system or education system overall in K-12, what you're really doing is you will allow different opportunities to exist. People may not go to college. That helps to defray the cost. The second thing we have to also understand is that you just can't lend infinite amounts of money into the college system. We need to start looking at different ways to address that model. But I think you want to have people have different pathways for success, not just going to college.
And we're at time. Dr. Banyai?
Yeah, those pathways absolutely exist, and some of them are fantastic, and they fill major needs in our workforce. That happens here in Southwest Florida every day. We have dual enrollment academies across our K-12 system that help fill those technical roles that we need in our area. So this is not about just saying, oh, we have that thing, let's forget about the other. We don't need to have loans to do this at all. We can make public investment in public education and expand that to higher ed, as well as cutting costs in the administration to make it more affordable overall.
And time. Another 30?
If you're interested in cutting costs in higher education, or frankly in any other thing you want to talk about, the last thing you want to do is have the federal government fund it unilaterally. Because what you're doing is you're spending other people's money on other people. It is the worst possible way to spend money. And so what you will actually be incentivizing is the university systems and the college systems to expand, because who's going to hold them accountable for the spending? Elected officials, career politicians who already have brought us to a $26 trillion debt in our country? That's not the path forward. We need to incentivize people to make these decisions for themselves
And that's
more.
time. And that brings us to our next question. John Davis?
For our next question, we're shifting gears toward the economy. This was another question that came in from a listener. Amendment 2, which is going to be on the November ballot here in Florida, would require incremental increases in the minimum wage here in Florida until a rate of $15 an hour is reached in 2016. Now, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reports the current median wage in Southwest Florida is $16.87 an hour. Low-wage earners struggling to get by tend to support increasing the minimum wage. Organizations like the Florida Chamber of Commerce call it a job killer and say that now would be a particularly bad time to implement this proposed minimum wage increase because businesses are already struggling and suffering amid the pandemic. Do you support an increase in the legal minimum wage here in Florida? And if so, why? And if so, why not? Mr. Donalds.
I don't support an increase to the amendment, to increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour. I think the voters should be voting no on Amendment 2. Here's why. We've had a couple of experiments in the United States about increasing the minimum wage already to $15 an hour. What happened? The people who now were making $15 an hour were getting less hours. Their hours were cut in the companies and the businesses that they were working for because the business did not have enough revenue in it to pay $15 an hour and also keep people full-time. So what's the second thing that we saw? We saw people go from full-time to part-time because they had less hours, even though they were making more per hour. What does that do to their health insurance? That means their health insurance is cut. I think this is the wrong way to go. All labor has value. There is an intrinsic value that every man and woman have when they go into the workforce. That is very clear. But if you mandate something as high as $15 an hour from the federal government, from the state level, what you're going to do is put massive burdens on small businesses, and people will not get the hours that they need at their jobs.
So Amendment 2, we should vote yes. It's an incremental change over time towards a goal that is way overdue. But I'm going to go a step further. What we need is a federal jobs guarantee that will allow us, anybody who wants a job to get a job. We will set a floor of wages starting there at $15 an hour, as well as benefits for time off and health care. This is something that we need to do immediately. I will go a step further. Since we are sitting here in an economy decimated by the failed decisions of Donald Trump and his enablers, like my opponent. What we need is to make sure that small businesses can get back on their feet. We need to give those businesses an opportunity by giving them grants to restart and pay wages for workers for 6 months to make sure that they can get in there and get those jobs going. Then we can start to make additional structural changes to our economy needed that are long overdue, that will help us and help families live better lives.
30 seconds, Mr. Donald.
Here's what's going to happen if we vote for Amendment 2 and the minimum wage goes up to $15 an hour. A lot of teenagers are not going to be able to get jobs when they're in high school. Unfortunately, a lot of young black kids, like myself when I grew up, are not going to be able to get jobs when they're in high school, trying to get the necessary skill set they need to move on to the next job. Hours are going to be cut. And for all the things that my opponent wants to spend money on, because there's apparently no limit, we're all going to suffer as a result. That's what's going to happen.
And time.
We're already there. I don't know what economy you've been looking at here in Southwest Florida, but teens don't work here. They can't, because there are too many people who are already having multiple jobs in retail and tourism to make ends meet every single day. They push those students out. I know, because I have researched that for the past 6 years, helping to understand our workforce and economy. We're already there. So what do we have to lose by trying something different? Or are we just going to listen to the business interests tell us that it's not time while we are standing in food lines with 15 million people across the United States unemployed?
And we are at time. So that brings us, I think, to our next question.
Yes, sticking with the economy and speaking of retail and tourism, do you have any thoughts about attracting light industry or tech companies to this region? The Southwest Florida Community Foundation's On the Table survey from this past fall identified affordable housing as a top concern for this region. Before the pandemic, anyway, the 3 fastest growing jobs in Southwest Florida had been retail, restaurant waiters, and food prep. If you're elected, what would you do in Congress to help communities in the district address the affordable housing crisis and also diversify the region's economy so we're not so dependent on what tend to be lower wage service sector jobs?
So before I jump in here, let me just go ahead and give a shout out to my friends at the Southwest Florida Community Foundation. They were one of my clients for several years, and I'm just so appreciative that they jumped in with the On the Table project, because it was a really needed thing to understand what's going on in our community. I usually describe it like this. We have a donut economy. We have a lot of folks in the service sector at the bottom, and then we have some high-end retirees, very few in the middle. And it is that affordable housing thing that stops people, as well as having good schools, because we've had continued disinvestment because money's been going to charter schools. But we also have not enough people who can have additional jobs because of that donut economy. Trailing spouses don't have anywhere to go if they come here and work as a general practitioner. It's extremely difficult. What we need to do is support small businesses. That's been my answer. I am a small business owner. This is extremely important to us in Southwest Florida. 91% of our businesses in Southwest Florida are small businesses. Let's help them grow by helping them gain access to capital and give them grants and subsidies the same way we do the big guys.
All right. It's your turn to talk about diversifying the options for jobs in the area.
Okay. I think this is incredibly important. We need to do everything we can to diversify our economy, but it's got to be sustainable. It's got to be consistent. You see, in Southwest Florida, over the past 10 years or so, 15 years, as long as I've lived here 17 years now, we've had targeted interests from city councils and from the county commissions trying to bring other industries here. Some of them stay, some of them go. The key thing for any business is to survive is business climate and consistency. The second one is education. And so when I talk about actually making sure that we have a more dynamic educational system in our area, it's because children achieving more and children being more prepared for the workforce is what all employers look for. The third thing is really on affordable housing. You're not going to be able to tackle affordable housing if we limit the amount of units per acre. I always find it funny how we can build high rises to the sky on the beach, but we can't build a 6-story duplex for people to get affordable housing that they need here in Southwest Florida.
And time.
Now, I know Mr. Donald spends a lot of time in Naples, but we got a lot of buildings in Fort Myers that are way taller than 6 units. We have some pretty high-density buildings going on down there, and I think we can continue that. But I think we have to address what's actually going on in our community. People are priced out of rent. People cannot get access to credit to get new houses because the affordable ones are out in this hot market. We need to help people get affordable access to workforce housing, and we could do it through subsidies and public-private partnerships like the one that's going on in Collier County.
And time. Mr. Dean.
We actually already do a lot of subsidization when it comes to affordable housing. We do it in the state legislature through the Sadowski Trust Fund. There's many federal programs that already do this right now, but it doesn't fix the problem. Why? Because the economics are wrong. Because the very basis of affordable housing doesn't make sense in Southwest Florida. We have limits on the amount of units you build an acre. So when you limit the amount of units you build an acre in an area that has less acreage available, where we want to buy more acreage for conservation, you do the math. It gets more expensive. We have to change those economics.
Dr. Banyai? Oh, I'm sorry, we're going to the next
I think,
slide.
yeah, there's
We can
another.
go back. We can just keep
Back and
going.
forth, keep saying the same thing. Next question.
Comes
John.
to me here. This next question is from also another audience member, and they write, do you support extending the Paycheck Protection Program within the Federal CARES Act to continue providing relief for small businesses through the pandemic? And I'll just add on to that, we know Congress recently recessed without passing a second COVID-19 economic relief bill, again, recessing without making progress toward a relief agreement as financial lifelines for Americans continue to expire. If you think Congress needs to pass another COVID economic relief bill, what should it include? Or do we need another one? And Mr. Donalds, we'll go to you.
About extending PPP, I do support it. I am very concerned about it, though. We find ourselves in a situation where governments are having to step into the economy because government largely shut down our economy because of COVID-19. So there is a responsibility there that the federal government has to step up. The sad thing is that Speaker Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi, is playing politics with the PPP program. The Republicans in the Senate have been ready to actually carve out a deal. The issue is they don't want to get into gross, massive bailouts of state governments because you have state governments in our country that have not been responsible with their money. This goes back to the balanced budget amendment, why that's so important. So what she's doing is holding up that bill to get small business owners the help that they need, and has put so many onerous rules on the PPP program that it is incredibly difficult for all small businesses to take advantage. I think it's wrong. I think what she needs to do is convene the House back, get back to the table, and hammer out a deal. She's refusing to do so.
We're at time. Dr. Banyai?
The only person refusing to do anything is Mitch McConnell to put the HEROES Act on up for a vote. That's been months and months. So if you want to talk about playing politics with the American people, you better look at your boy, because this is not what we need right now. The PPP absolutely should be extended, but what we really need is to make sure that it's going to the right people. Less than 2% of the funds, 2% of the businesses that were approved for the PPP were Black-owned businesses. This is a clear sign of part of the systemic racism that we have in this country. Additionally, they were given to small businesses, but not the type of small businesses that you and I think of, like the ones that here in Southwest Florida with 20 or less employees, which are micro businesses, but they went to 500 and less employees. It got sucked up, so sole proprietorships like mine never even got a chance to access those funds to make sure that our companies were still going. So I think we need to put the responsibility for helping the American people where it lies, and we need to pass the CARES Act, or the HEROES Act.
There was a proposed deal on the table in Washington. Nancy Pelosi stepped away from the deal. She recessed the House of Representatives. She's the Speaker of the House. It's time to get serious. It's actually quite simple to extend the PPP program. We should be doing that. But the other thing we must do is get rid of these ridiculous rules that, frankly, the Democrats in Congress have put on the PPP program. Because what those rules do in a banking system, it makes it harder to get the support that is necessary to small businesses and micro businesses. Because if you're a banker, and I used to be one, if you're a banker and you're lending out money, you go to the relationships you know first, especially when you have additional rules being placed on you in an arbitrary way by politicians in Washington. They need to get back to the table. They need to do this right. They need to get rid of a bunch of this red tape so the micro businesses that my opponent is talking about can actually get the help that they need.
And we're at time, and I believe that's going to be our.
I get
another
a
30
rebuttal.
Okay, there you go.
So I agree. Let's make sure that the rules are working for the people and they're not overly onerous. But let's actually revisit why we're even talking about this. Our economy is collapsing. We are in a depression because of the failed response to the Trump virus by Trump and his enablers, DeSantis, and my opponent. 200,000 Americans are dead. 30 million people, 40 million people lost their jobs, and 15 million remain unemployed. That is why we need PPP money and all these other supports, is because the economy is continuing to collapse, and we cannot fix the economy until we solve for the pandemic. Until the pandemic is under control, we will not be able to address the economy. So let's really take a look at what's going on with this failed COVID response by Trump and his enablers like Byron Donalds.
And we're at time, and we're about out of time for the entire debate, but I wanted to ask you both one quick question before we all go. A lot of people have concerns voting on November 3rd. Do you all plan to vote in person, or are you doing absentee ballot? Just curious.
I vote in person. That's me. Always
You vote
do
in
it.
person?
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Banyai?
I was going to vote by mail to help keep myself and my family safe, but at this point in time, with the attacks on our voting system that are being forecasted by Donald Trump, I may actually have to go and show up because I am worried that they're going to be discounted at this point, and I'm just really fearful for our democracy overall.
All right, well, if anybody else has more concerns about that, we'll be having a special show on October 15th about the vote in Southwest Florida, talking with voting officials in our area, so be sure to tune in for that. But I'd like to thank our candidates, both Byron Donalds and Dr. Cindy Banyai, for being here tonight and sharing with us their view on many topics and plans when or if elected. We'll be talking with both of you on election night. And I want to thank our journalists who asked all of the tough questions. John Davis with WGCU and Amy Bennett Williams from the News Press of Fort Myers. And I want to thank our viewers for being such an important part of tonight's debate by submitting your thoughtful questions. Be sure to join us on October 15th for our next COVID virtual town hall, which will be live again October 15th. We will see you there.